Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual retreat. We are delighted to have all of you. We have a really beautiful group joining us today. This project came out of a brilliant idea that Doug Kahn had together with you all. It came out of the last JCPA conference meeting, and there was a request to create a network for JCRCs that is similar to the network that was created for the directors. So this is specific for the lay leadership of the JCRCs across the country. This retreat is the first of 3 virtual meetings, and we hope that you'll be able to participate in all of them. We will then continue in between and we will continue to be in touch to create, so be establishing a listserv for the chair. We thank you, say a special thank you to Shelley Groff, who is chairing this project and who is away and in Florida, so otherwise and she will be on future calls. For you to calendar JC 1st to the 24th, it will give you all an opportunity to come and see each other in person, to network in person, and also to really benefit from the work, hands-on work for JCPA and what we're up to, and what other ideas. We thank you all for your dedication as chairs to your local communities, and we are very grateful to you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules to spend the time with us. We believe that we believe in JCPA and the value of this network, the value that JCPA can give to you, that you can give to us. And we're trying to create a very good, strong line of communication and networking for all of you. So enjoy your time together, enjoy the virtual retreat. We look forward to hearing feedback and continuing to speak with you. And very much. And Shantova, to everybody, a healthy, blessed, happy New Year to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Gorelik. I am the Senior Vice President of JCPA. Unfortunately, our President and CEO, David Bernstein, is not available to be with us today. He is feeling well. Before we get started with the actual program, I wanted to also acknowledge all the JCRC directors that are on the call as well. This project is being done in partnership with all the JCRCs as part of our effort to strengthen and empower the full JCRC leadership around the country. So what we wanted to do to get started is to introduce all the staff that's here with us in New York. So I'm Melanie Gorelik. I'm the Senior Vice President. I've been with JCPA for a little over a year. And I was a Community Relations Committee Director at New Jersey for 10 years. So I bring with me the experience of the field. Kaya, do you want to introduce yourselves? We're going to make some space. Why don't I come out? Tammy, do you want to? Hi, I'm Haya Luftig. I am a Vice President here at the JCPA. Among other things, I work on our Emerging Leaders Project and our Frank Fellow project. I also am in charge of any technology issues we have today, so please feel free to call me. We're not over there. If you have any issues, my cell phone was in the email that we sent out yesterday, and I look forward to talking with all of you.
Wow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Gilden, and I am the Senior Policy Associate for JCPA. I joined just over a year ago, and I help Melanie do all of our policy work across the board.
Hello, everyone. My name is Simcha Shapiro. I'm the Chief Financial Officer. I've been with JCPA for close to over 11 years. I oversee all the accounting work at JCPA and also work on different programs, helping out with the annual conference and also with fundraising.
Hello, I'm Elisa Delamico, and I assist the President and Vice President and Haya in making sure that the office runs smoothly and that all logistical details are taken care of. I also work closely with Melanie to do graphic design work and communications work and marketing for the JCPA.
Someone has accidentally shared their screen with us. If you could please stop that, we would appreciate it. Rebecca Engel, I believe it might be you. Thank you. Also, please, for some reason our mute controls are not working well. Please make sure you're muted unless we ask for questions.
And I'm Doug Kahn, and I am delighted to be consulting with the JCPA. I was director of the JCRC in San Francisco for 27 years and retired last year, and now have a consultancy practice through the San Francisco JCRC, and as somebody who has deeply been committed to the work of JCPA for all these years, I'm delighted to be working with the remarkable team here. Today, as you all saw from the printout of the 3 virtual retreat agendas, we're going to talk about an overview of the field and the top priorities and challenges today, the work and services of JCPA, and a discussion of the unique role of the JCRC and the values. And I have to say, I hope you will all be able to join us for the next 2 sessions of our...
We're trying to get Rebecca to stop sharing her screen because that's what's preventing us.
Oh, really? What do you hear my voice?
To add in your ideas of the areas that you think would be most valuable for you as chairs. I think one of the things that has struck me over my many years in JCRC field is that I don't know any other organization that I've been associated with where the partnership between lay leaders and professionals is as close and is as respectful and is as authentic as it is within the sphere of community relations. That's why we're glad that along with our CRC chairs who dedicate so much time and commitment during their tenure, that we also have a number of our directors on the calls today. So we want to hear from you. We want to be supportive of your needs as JCRC chairs, because we are all in this boat together. What I'm going to do at the outset is talk a little bit about the history of Jewish community relations and sort of the foundation of the JCPA. And we're going to have interval times for questions because we definitely want to hear, what's on your mind and some of the areas that are most important to you. When I look at the history, I have to start with the Bible and say that maybe one of the first examples of classic Jewish community relations was when Joseph was in Egypt, and his work, well with the Pharaoh, represented an example of Jewish community relations in the diaspora. And then I fast forward to the role of Queen Esther, and I look at both of these as remarkable examples of community relations where Jews in the diaspora had to figure out how to develop relationships with the key influentials in the broader society in order to protect the Jewish communities at the time. That's what Joseph did in big picture terms. That's what Queen Esther did in big picture terms. And those are models that actually have really helped through time. To put it differently, from the moment Jews stepped in the diaspora, Jews had to practice community relations. So if there was any key thing I would say from a historical vantage point, it's that we hold on to a legacy that has existed for millennia. add to that, sort of fast forward to the American picture. American Jews arrived in New York Harbor, near where we sit today, in 1654. A group of 23 Jews fleeing persecution in Recife and Brazil. And Peter Stuyvesant, who ran the city on behalf of the Dutch West Indies Company, wanted to keep the Jews out. But the Jews petitioned to be able to stay, the 23 Jews, and the Dutch West Indies Company board of directors told Stuyvesant that despite their understanding why he wouldn't want to allow this wretched group of 23 Jews into New York, and that they might, of course, cause problems, that he had to do it because A, Jews had historically been persecuted, and B, there were Jewish members on the board of directors of the Dutch West Indies Company. Again, to put it differently, from the day that Jews stepped foot in America,
What happened? Unmute.
okay, so I'd like to continue, but it would be helpful to just have people confirm that they can hear me at this point. Okay, good, excellent. So let me back up for just a very brief period and say that I was talking about the role of community relations in American Jewish history from the day Jews first came to America. Fast forward to the 1940s. And American Jewish organizations were active in trying to address the Holocaust. The response was weak. And one of the reasons it was weak was because of the fact that American Jewish organizations didn't come together. So each organization decided on how it would respond to various German actions that were taken, and there wasn't a strong political response of the American Jewish community. It was out of that self-assessment that the critical failure of American Jewry during the Holocaust was the inability to speak with a united voice and mount the kind of political pressure that would have been required to address the challenges, for example, including the number of Jews allowed into the United States, that it was determined that never again should American Jews be lacking for a political response. And out of that, in 1944, the Federation movement, key major national organizations, established the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, which was known as NACRAC for many years and ultimately changed its name to the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. The JCPA, which is where we sit today, is comprised of, I think it's about 120 to 125 JCRCs around the country that come in all shapes and sizes, and 16 national Jewish agencies, which have community relations as a core part of their function. And so JCPA was founded in the aftermath of the Holocaust in order to be that voice that represented the organized American Jewish community on public affairs issues. Now, we live in a time where many single-issue organizations have sprouted up, but one of the defining rules of JCPA is to balance what I will call the particularistic agenda and a universal agenda within the context of what American Jewish organizations see as affecting the status of the American Jewish community. I often talk about the mission of the American Jewish community as being to safeguard the conditions under which Jews as individuals and as a community can thrive, to safeguard the conditions under which Jews as a community and individuals can thrive. And in order to do that, that means that we must essentially be engaged in dealing with issues that are sort of what I'll call first principle issues, such as taking on anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews, and all world Jewry and the threats that Jews faced over many years, first in in the Soviet Union, in Syria, and Ethiopia, when JCPA and NACRAC were so active in mobilizing the community, and what I'll call second principles, which is to focus on the conditions in American society that are conducive to protecting the status of Jews and all minorities. And that has been seen as being synonymous with ensuring that our democratic institutions are strong. And some of the key issues that have been regarded as reflecting the strength of our democratic institutions are issues around immigration, around public education, around separation of religion and state. So when you look at the totality of the agenda that historically the JCPA and community relations councils have been engaged in, they are not issues that are picked sort of willy-nilly. There will always be a debate to be had on what constitutes a Jewish or a Jewish community issue, but at the core, they are issues that directly affect the status of Jews or indirectly affect the status of Jews. And on those issues that indirectly as well as directly affect the status of Jews, we are best protected to the extent that we broaden our relationship building beyond just the Jewish community. And that's been part of the bread and butter of the movement since it was established. So when I talk about the bread and butter of the movement, I often talk about 3 C's. I talk about consensus building. How we define a consensus, again, might be individual, community to community, but essentially it means some form of supermajority whereby the vast majority of people concur about a way forward on a particular policy, and it probably doesn't mean unanimity. And I believe to this day that even with all of the polarization and challenges that we face, that on most issues, It's not a question of whether there's a consensus, it's a question of where does that consensus lie. The second C is coalition building. You know, I like to say that on a good day, we represent 2% of the American population, on a good day. So if we're going to multiply our impact, we have to seek common cause with partners in other communities. Often it means other ethnic communities, religious communities, other minority communities, and identify common ground on issues of concern with which we can move forward. And that's where the coalition building comes in. And the third function is a clearinghouse, even when we cannot obtain consensus, to bring around the table all the groups that are working on a particular issue, and to ensure that in general we are kind of all moving in a similar direction, even though we may take on particular roles, is also a critically important function as well. Now, one of the unique roles of JCPA, and I think I'll conclude with this in terms of my opening, and that I think is its signature role, if you will, is the ability to mobilize the grassroots of the organized American Jewish community. It mobilized the grassroots of the American Jewish community 20 years ago in December 30 years ago, December 1987.
Okay, we apologize for the confusion. Again, my name is Melanie Gorelick. I'm the Senior Vice President here, and I work on the communications program and policy work. As I started a year ago, I have been very, very active in advocacy with JCPA and at the national level. And one of the things that I did when I first came was a survey of the JCRCs, of which I thank many of my colleagues, because we had about 80 JCRCs actually respond, which was amazing. And what we learned was that over 60 of the JCRC directors were new within 2.5 years. And most of them had not received professional training as a group from JCPA. So the past year, we really spent a lot of time streamlining the education of the professionals to ensure that people understood that that those working in the community relations field are part of a larger network, especially around policy work. The role of JCPA is to build consensus around policy work, help the community to vet policy issues, and to come to some sort of consensus. And we do this through both through resolutions, which I will get to in a little while. But we also convene. One of our major goals is to convene. And we convene the JCRCs, especially the professionals, so that they have time to grapple with issues. When there's an emergency situation or something major happens, whether it's the election or an executive order on an issue such as immigration that we thought we weren't going to be dealing with, how we respond to a polarized community of some who want to respond to executive appointments and we're not having policy on it, how do we handle those situations? We come together and we discuss them as a field so that we can help all the JCRCs handle these issues locally. We know these same conversations are happening at the field level. But we also noticed that, looking at our notes, that a lot of chairs were not engaged with JCPA, and we were not engaged with them in any professional way. And we understand and recognize that the chair's role is to advocate for their JCRC within their federation, help set their agenda locally, to do all the work in partnership with their JCRC professional. And we think this is a really, really important partnership and helps the JCRC be most effective. So we set aside to figure out what would be the best way of also welcoming the chairs into the JCPA family and having you be part of all of the work that we're doing. Additionally, we noticed something else, that there's a new generation, that people who had been part of the JCRC family on the boards, as directors, as chairs, for many, many years, because a lot of people come on to their JCRCs and don't leave, and people in federations wonder why, but we're really proud of it. We think this is a pillar of the federation world, is to represent our Jewish community to the non-Jewish community and have a voice in stake in current events locally and nationally. But we noticed there's a lot of change going on, not only with JCRCs, but also with people who sit on the board. People who are on your board who aren't aware that they're part of a national network. They don't know that policy is discussed at the national level. They don't know the kind of support that the network can provide to you locally should an issue come up on anti-Semitism or polarization around current events. And in addition, there's a lot of relationship building that needs to happen, because there's also a generational shift happening with clergy, both rabbis and pastors and reverends and imams and local influentials in your community. So in a way, we're rebuilding community relations again from scratch after many, many years of strong work. And it's something that we really think is important. And this is, when we started last year and we didn't know who was going to be president, we thought that we were going to continue at a time where national legislation, federal public policy work, was kind of going to be stalled, not work so hard. And we were looking at, we really needed to focus on building more relationships, stronger relationships with the African American community and the Muslim Jewish community. And we set forward a number of task forces to do that work. So we created a criminal justice reform task force, and we created a Muslim Jewish task force. Well, starting November, our work went on a different schism and a different task. So I will come back to tell you how we're going to be doing our work this year. But really, we've gone back to very traditional work from when JCPA really started as a convener and as somebody really focused on our policy, where we have consensus, and best practices of how to act during this time of polarization, of new issues being put before us without much notice, and a community that, where we need to educate, advocate, and try to, keep people at our tables, even though we have diverse opinions. The Jewish community has become much more diverse than it used to be, and yet we don't want that diversity to tear apart the community relation function. So what I'm ultimately saying really is that we really are here because we want to strengthen this field. We feel the Jewish platform, the Jewish voice, is a very, very respected and important voice in the national public sphere, and that we actually, think that we have a wonderful way of doing and creating policy that has been modeled by the civil rights movement and the interfaith movement and others, and we want to keep it strong. We want to ensure that America is a democratic country operating on democratic principles, and that supports pluralism and civil rights for many groups, not just the Jewish community. So for JCPA's goals, the reason that we had the virtual retreat today, and we know that there's so much going on, you're having your opening meetings, we're getting ready for the holidays, and that we could have had this later on. But the reason that we want to have this now is we just had our fall meeting, which is where we bring board and leaders together, and maybe next year everyone will be able to come. But we wanted to make sure that some of the conversations we had with them in terms of setting the agenda, what our priorities are shared with those of you who cannot come in person. And so that we can have discussions with you as well to make sure that where we're heading makes sense to you. And so to do this at the top of the year and to create this network is really important to how we're going to operate for the rest of the year. So we are going to be sending you some packets, the packets that we handed out, so that you'll have all the materials. But I'm going to go through some of them. Our goals for this year, what we've done is we've lessened our task forces and committees here at the national level so that we
Go back to the beginning of priorities.
Okay, so I have to go back to the beginning of the priorities. So what we're doing, so this year, the way that JCPA operates, so that everybody knows, is we have the field, of which in a sense we're a trade association, and we are kind of the hub for the community relations field of the JCRCs, which is made up of 125 JCRCs. These JCRCs, you know, we help to educate, provide best practices and things that I've said before. But additionally, we also have board members. We have national leadership. And thirdly, we have national agencies that pay dues to us, of which we convene. So this year, the way that JCPA has traditionally worked is that we've had 3 main task forces. These task forces have been ongoing. Last year, we decided to basically condense these task forces, issue-based task forces, into 4. And this year, we've put them into 2. So the 3 buckets of work that we're going to be doing, one is servicing the JCRCs. We want to strengthen and empower the field. We want to do it well. We want to have time available to you. And this is going to include training professionals and professional development. It's going to include this Chairs Initiative to ensure that chairs effectively have the opportunity also to have skill building, communication with each other, dealing with obstacles and challenges. We've created something called CRCast, which is a webinar that features David Bernstein, our CEO, where he interviews high-level people on a range of issues of importance to JCRCs. This came out of the JCRCs asking us to help bring high-level people locally. So while we can't get to 125 communities on a regular basis, we can through the web. We've done 5 of them already. And continuing to provide ongoing support, calls, education, and resources. We also are doing our best to advocate that JCRCs have the resources they need and the staffing that they need within the federation system. You should know that all but 13 federations are departments of JCRCs are departments of their federations. And the other 13 are agencies of their federation. So we have a special relationship with the federation system, and we depend on them for resourcing and ensuring that we have the space to do our work. The second bucket is on coordinating agencies. It's very important as an agency that was created kind of to be an interagency program that we are seen as conveners and the place where we vet current events and important issues. And we also know from the JCRCs that there are so much information that you need information from ADL and AJC and NCJW and a lot of JCRCs where these organizations don't have local offices, you're also doing their work. So we are working very hard to be a portal for you where we can call their information and bring it to you in a user-friendly way. And part of that is to ensuring that we're coordinating and that we're doing the best we can to make it easy for you. And so the way that so we're going to be doing that, and that has different components to it. So one, most of the policy work of JCPA is now done in New York, but we do have a part-time person in Washington, D.C. David Bernstein is in Washington, D.C. twice a week, and I'm in Washington, D.C. once a month. And I'm going to come back to this when we discuss policy. But I want you to know that as a coordinating body, we are going to be bringing Washington reps of our Jewish national agencies together every other month so that we have time to share priorities, see where we have common cause that we're working on so that we can come together for advocacy and a stronger voice. And also we're going to be doing legislative updates for you that will come out of these meetings. We're also going to be convening just the heads of those legislative agencies together, and we brought and get to know them. And we're going to be doing two new things. We're organizing agencies to meet twice a year in New York, which hasn't been done before, to create a network here. And we're also going to be doing a blue ribbon task force in JFNA that's going to be reviewing the whole community relations field and its relationships with Federation, with an eye for showing its relevancy and how it can be strengthened.
Someone would like to know what the relationship to the Council of Presidents.
Okay. So someone asked what the relationship is with the Council of Presidents, and that's a very good question. All Jewish organizations, so I don't want to say all, almost all Jewish organizations that have a board and membership and have a multi-issue focus are members of the Council of Presidents. And that group is much larger than the JCRC, that's the JCPA membership. So it's much larger. There are groups that are trying now to go on to the Council of Presidents, and they don't necessarily have a board in the same way that we do, and they might be one issue focused and they haven't been accepted. But we are an active member of the Council of Presidents, and this is a way for all the Jewish organizations at the top echelons of our organizations to just come together and vet what they need to. Their agenda is more Israel focused, but is different than JCPA. They're not looking to help the field. They just want to make sure at the national level agencies are coordinated. I hope that's helpful. So to go back, our third bucket and our really important bucket is our policy work. We need to come back to working on policy. With the new administration, we are just dealing with policy every day. We're having questions from the field. We need to respond to what's happening nationally, and we are convening our agencies around it. And this is an area that we really would love to work with you more on. We'd love to be more in lockstep on a number of things. So we're going to be supporting our ongoing policy work in DC and New York. We're going to be educating the community and providing opportunities of education for your boards, creating advocacy campaigns on priority issues that have been vetted and that need Jewish voices. We're going to respond to current events. We have a policy advisory committee if you want to be on it. If you really like working on policy at the national level, we are expanding that committee because that is going to be our main lay committee, our main place. So instead of having 4 or 5 committees, we're really putting everything into this right now because we need to do this work well. We also are going to have a number of different initiatives that you'll hear over time. And we are going to continue our criminal justice work, which I'll also talk about, but we're hoping to raise money for a program director that could really help the field launch it more successfully and provide support to you in a greater way than we can do right now. Our policy issues right now that are our #1 priority are 5. And we did send out an August toolkit. I don't know how many of you were able to go visit with your Congress men and women, but we did encourage everybody to have as many visits as possible. And we provided background materials and talking points. But we did, but our major issues that we see working on this fall that are important for our field, one is immigration. So we are working both on the Muslim ban and DACA, and we are going to be doing a really wide campaign in support of passage of the DREAM Act, and we hope that you're really going to be able to work with us on that and get lots of signatures from your communities. We're going to talk more about this on the 3rd session, but I felt it was important to put the issues in front of you. The other one is civil rights. The other is separation of church and state, because there are many efforts right now to weaken the Johnson Amendment. We had sent opportunities to sign on to a petition of faith voices from around the country, which we brought to the Hill with other faith-based communities. We had 4,000 signatures. You know, we as a bipartisan organization know the importance of the separation of church and state. We work very closely with JSNA and the Israel Action Network on the delegitimization of Israel. And then there are issues such as the budget related to cutting of a lot of supportive funding for food stamps and other really important support to people who are the most vulnerable, Medicaid,
There's a question.
et cetera.
Can we ask how many have consensus on DACA and DREAM Act at some point to see if we're working in tandem?
Okay, so let me go. We're going to talk more about this on a different one, but I want to say that JCPA has consensus position on DACA. This is the way that JCPA works and how policy works, is that every year we have a call for resolutions. And we just had a call for resolutions. The due date was last Friday because we did vet the issues that came in. However, it's never really a hard deadline. If issues come up, and we can tackle more issues. These issues then, if we don't have policy on them, we then set aside a committee of experts who write a resolution. The resolution is sent to the field in November, December, and then every single community, every 125 JCRC is asked to vet the community, provide us their input and edits and et cetera, and then they send it back. We send it back to the people who authorize it, comes back to us, it goes back to you, and at our plenum every year, resolutions are passed. Once a resolution is passed, and they have to be passed by consensus, once they're passed, they become part of our policy compendium. And once they're part of our policy compendium, they become national policy. And this is how we do our work. It's based on the national policy. What happens in many JCRCs, but we know every community is different, and how every community does policy is different, is that you as part of the network, and having had the opportunity to weigh in on this, is able to share with your community the national policy that was created around this, to see whether or not your community wants to engage in advocacy and is on the same page as the national. Several years ago, we did around comprehensive immigration reform. We took a very strong position on DACA. And so we were able to actually make a very swift and strong statement about it, and we'll be able to take policy on the DREAM Act. We will be able to share that policy with you, and we did refer to it in our statement, so that you will be able to share that with your boards. It's important for the boards to know that you're not just starting from scratch as if the Jewish community never dealt with this, or that our network doesn't have some resolution and support on it. And it's up to you, of course, about whether or not this issue just can't be touched on your board, or whether JCPA gives you cover to do some work so that it doesn't really need to be brought up again to your board in such a comprehensive way. Those are some of the issues, but that is how we, as the voice, the convener of this group, sets out and does policy and also carries out policy. And many in our network use this policy work to do your policy work locally. So I hope that's helpful. And it's why we also want to bring you into this fold so that everybody knows how policy is made, and also to encourage you to participate in the resolutions process. Many, especially people who've done this over time, sometimes feel that, why do we have to have the plenum and the resolutions? Why do we have to have a meeting that's totally dedicated to wordsmithing? But we need it for in times like this, where the Johnson Amendment could be on the line, or, immigration issues could be on the line, or delegitimization could be on the line of Israel. Policy can change. We want to be able to have policy of which we can act and encourage the network to come together and act. And so we really encourage that you educate the community yourself by having them engage in policy setting. Then they understand how the field works and they know that they're a part of it. So it's something that we strongly encourage as well. Are there any questions about that?
And while people are thinking about questions, I might suggest that people type their questions, just given the technological, I think we've conquered that mountain for now, relatively speaking. But maybe just zoom just type your questions away and we'll try to fold them in. I want to go back for a second because one question was what had my point been about 1987?
Yeah.
And I just want to say for anybody who couldn't hear that what I was talking about was one of the unique roles of JCPA in mobilizing the American Jewish community. I mean, we are talking about over 100,000 Jews being brought to Washington on brief notice in order to demonstrate the overwhelming concern about the treatment of Soviet Jewry on the eve of the Gorbachev-Reagan summit, such that Reagan could literally sort of point out of the Oval Office and say, look at what I'm dealing with. Look how of great concern this issue is. The ability to mobilize the field is something, through the network of JCRCs, is something that JCPA has proudly done throughout its history, continued to do during the period of addressing the challenges of the BDS movement, and will continue to do so. So a question that's been posed is, what is the procedure for asking JCRCs for consensus on issues? Maybe I'm not quite sure on which side of that issue the questioner is thinking, if it's on the JCPA side or the JCRC side. If it's about the JCPA process, I will turn it back to Melanie. So if we can get a little clarity on what you're asking. But what I will say is that every JCRC typically has its own mechanism for determining consensus. And one of the advantages of having the kind of network we do is that there's tremendous sharing among JCRCs. The CRC directors have a listserv, the CRC chairs will have a listserv, and we compare notes constantly in terms of how we develop our best practices. And those best practices evolve over time. One of the things I wanted to add, and then I want to open it up for a few more questions before I talk about the unique functions of the JCRC, is to think about what some of the challenges are that have emerged over the last number of years, and at the same time what those opportunities are that present themselves. One of the challenges has been the tremendous growth of single-issue organizations. We are a multi-issue body, and people have passions where, they may be passionate about church state, but not about Israel, or about Israel, but not about immigration. And that's, of course, their right. What we ask people to do is to come to the table, because on the one hand, they may be passionate about Israel, but they understand that our effective advocacy on Israel requires that we have a broad agenda, or they may be concerned about the domestic agenda, but understand that first principles require that we also be engaged on Israel. And so we are operating in an era where single-issue organizations have sprouted, and yet the value of bringing together that diversity of views is tremendously important. The second challenge, of course, is related to that. And that is that we are in an era of polarization where it means that people have begun to lose the ability to sit in the same room with people who have strongly divergent views. And JCRCs, by definition, bring together people with diverse views. I'll talk a little bit more under our key functions about what that means as a positive. But in an era, I'll say this for now, in an era of polarization, it kind of is that sanctuary where we can still have thoughtful, nuanced debate about complex issues. By the way, another challenge is when I entered the field, the overwhelming majority of our time was spent on educating the non-Jewish community and advocating in the non-Jewish community. Issues somehow seem simpler. As they've become more complex and views have sort of evolved within the Jewish community, we now also need to spend much more time educating the Jewish community. The challenge is, how do we do that in a way that doesn't detract from our ability to also do the outreach work we have to do in the broader community? Yet another challenge is that JCRCs are this remarkable, what I call elastic vehicle, whereby we like to resolve issues at the lowest level of intervention required, which often means behind the scenes. We'll mobilize the community for a major solidarity rally when it's called for. But if we get a call about anti-Semitic acts in a school and we can resolve it with a call to the principal, or we get another issue that emerges where a simple call or an off-the-record meeting might achieve it, that's really efficient, and it's been our track record. But in the era of social media, where we have so many eyes and so little time to operate, it creates a challenge for doing that kind of thoughtful behind-the-scenes work. It's not eliminated, but at the same time, we have to be more cognizant of a vacuum not being created. So these are some of the challenges that exist. The two overriding opportunities that I think, far outweigh the challenges. One would used to say trump the challenges, but I try to avoid that word to the extent that I can. And I say that in a spirit of nonpartisanship. But one major opportunity is that our work is seen today as more relevant than ever. The number of people in our community who are concerned about issues of immigration, who are concerned about the growth of hate groups and of not only virulent anti-Semitism, but expressions of hate directed at other groups, whether it's the Muslim American community, the African American community, or other communities. The number of Jews who are looking for the Jewish community to step up is absolutely tremendous. Related to that is I think there's a greater appreciation now than there has been in many years for the value of the Jewish community engaging with the broader community on issues where there is seen to be common cause. I think that for a number of years there was this kind of internal focus within our community, but now there is much greater appreciation of that value. That's the sweet spot of JCRCs, and I think that's critically important as well. So I just wanted to mention those. So should we open it up for questions, or did you want to add something before we
Let's open it up and maybe at the end.
Okay, great, terrific. So we would ask people if you have any questions to please.
So I would say the first question was still the JCPA's consensus. How does JCPA reach consensus?
Okay.
Okay, that's for you.
So, how JCPA reaches consensus is the resolutions process that I just set out, which is, it's an annual resolutions process where we deal with the specific issues and we put policy on the policy compendium. Everyone can have access to the policy compendium. It's on our website. We also have some backgrounders that we'll email out, which they might have gotten emailed out. Did you email us? Maybe
To the policy priorities.
the policy priorities, yeah. On some major issues that we think will be before Congress now. But the policy compendium is up there. Those are issues that have gone through extensive vetting. If any of you have been to plenum or do this in your own community, you know the details and thought that goes into each one of these policy statements. When the issue, let's say an issue hasn't been dealt with in a number of years, and it comes back on the agenda, it comes to the Policy Advisory Committee and the board to review whether it's still relevant, and if it is, we continue on to take policy positions. And we kind of have this relationship with JCRCs that they look to us to see how we are responding to an issue, and then see whether or not that makes sense for them at the local level. So we hope that we are providing that service to the JCRCs. If it's something that we think is controversial or that there might be assistance needed, we do hold calls. We also, just as part of our professional development and support to JCRCs, help JCRC directors figure out how to take an issue to their board if they think it needs to be re-brought up again. But honestly, there isn't a lot of that. Usually if JCPA is taking a position, we see a lot of support from that. The other thing I will say is before we do take a position, we do check with our national agencies. We do not want to be out of lockstep with ADL and AJC and other national groups that we convene, because we, again, are the convener and consensus building of these national groups. So if the Orthodox Union and the Reform are really on opposite ends, or AJC and ADL aren't really agreeing, then we will consider whether or not we should be putting out any statement. And often at those times we don't. We instead send links and statements and background material to the JCRCs so they can be informed on what the conversations are at the national level, but you won't see us taking a position on those things.
I wanna try this, and Melanie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this. Linda asked a question about, is JCPA consensus also a veto of one or supermajority? Here's my understanding, that at the end of the day, it's a majority vote that will carry a decision, but that the spirit of the conversation is to try to look for consensus. So you will see groups working out in the hall or trying to work out disagreements in the hall or the night before, so that everything that can be done to try to enlarge the consensus will be done, even though if it's a formal roll call vote and it's carried by one vote, it will be carried by one vote. Many years ago, all of the national agencies had veto power. That was eliminated, except that the religious streams have veto power on issues that are determined to be religious in nature. And we are the only body nationally, I think, today that has at the table the main religious streams, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and Reconstructionist, around the table. And there is, there is a trade-off there, but the result is one that everybody in the room, I think, would say is a positive one. And I can't count how many times the Reform movement and the Orthodox movement have stood up together in support of a particular motion. It's often a very powerful and poignant moment when that does. Please.
I was saying a current example was just a few months ago with the whole situation with the Kotel. We wanted to put out a statement on the Kotel, and we couldn't do it without the Orthodox Union. And the Orthodox Union usually does not support JCPA taking any position about an issue taking place in Israel, especially on issues of pluralism. They feel that that's probably beyond our scope. Although they don't have veto power on those issues, we take their support very seriously. So we don't want to not do something with them. And behind the scenes, we work really hard to say this is a really important issue, not only for JCPA, but the Federation and the Jewish Agency. Everyone's coming together. It's really important that we speak out. And we were the only statement that included the Orthodox Union in the entire United States. We had all streams of the Jewish streams came out of JCPA. It might not have been as strong as some people would have liked. We didn't deal with the issue of conversion, but we did provide an opportunity for the whole community to come together. We grappled with it at the leadership level, and we put out a statement that nationally was accepted around the country. There was no pushback from Orthodox groups. So,
But, you know, there will be
That
that.
was a good example.
There will be that rare issue where it is hard for JCPA to achieve a consensus. There were individual JCRCs, including ours in San Francisco and others, that took a position on same-sex civil marriage. It was a tough issue for JCPA, even though it clearly spoke out against discrimination. And so there will be those rare issues, but the trend or the general experience is much more oriented toward achieving consensus on issues. And, you know, it's well worth reading the documents that are online of recent consensus positions. And I just want to echo something that Melanie said, and that is, if your JCRC is deeply involved in an issue that you think should be brought to the national, then by all means, bring that issue. We brought, you know, over the years, for example, issues relating to civil society in Israel for all of Israel's citizens, including non-Jewish citizens in Israel, and JCPA adopted that policy. Other communities and groups have brought many different issues to the JCPA.
Last year, one of the main issues that was brought was Voting Rights Act and the erosion of the Voting Rights Act. And so, you know, we have strong policy of the Voting Rights Act, but we did determine that given the new legislation, the new court cases that had happened, that we needed to reaffirm and to strengthen our work on this. The year before, we did criminal justice reform, which actually led to a full-out advocacy and education work on this. And we believe criminal justice reform is our way to re-engage relationships with the African-American community. So we want to be current. At the same time, there are issues that probably JCPA is not going to take the lead on, but it was really important to our member agencies that the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault was seen as a community relations issue, and this passed unanimously. Actually, with less conversation than the people who actually wrote it wanted to have, because they did a good job of preparing it, and people really understood the need for a resolution on this topic. So it can relate to something that's square and modern, something that needs to be strengthened from the past, or something new. And I can't encourage you enough to do this process with your boards, and so that you can all grapple together and understand how the policies are made. And if you have lawyers on the board or people who are into this sort of thing, it's actually a lot of fun for them, and they'll see the value of the CRC.
I want to get back to a question that was posed by Bob Hornstein, our colleague in Portland, Oregon, who addressed the question about resurrecting the Minkoff Institute, which was a several-day training institute, in-service training institute for CRC directors. I'm not sure we're there yet, but it enables us to say this. JCPA, under its new leadership with David and Melanie and Haya, have determined that professional development in the field is critically important, and for the first time in decades, we recently came out with a CRC Director's Manual. We're adapting that for new JCRCs because one of the wonderful developments in the last year or so was discovering that there may be a dozen or more new or resurrected JCRCs throughout the country, including in some very small communities like Reading, Pennsylvania, and Vermont, just by way, or York, Pennsylvania, by way of example. So we're doing a sort of smaller version of that for the CRCs that are new, and we're also going to do a version of the manual for CRC chairs. On top of that, I want to say that other areas of professional development will continue to be evolving, and it's a top priority. It's what I'm spending most of my time working on. But I really also want to encourage, for those of you who do engage with the Federation, to make sure that there's adequate money in the budget for travel and conferences, because that is critically important for directors to be able to engage with their colleagues around the country. At the annual conference, if there is able to be a Minkoff again. One of the reasons the Minkoff Institute, I think, kind of petered out for the moment was that much of the support came from the JCPA in terms of a modest grant, but also some of the money had to be, in terms of travel and the like, had to be provided by the directors. And we were finding that more and more directors didn't have that in their budget. So that is just so important. And when I think about what our directors are dealing with on you can call it 24/6 or 24/7 basis, but in this environment, just the daily, assault of issues that require attention and the strong opinions and currents that exist within the room, there's not a lot of, extra time. And so the ability to also go to an occasional conference can be very, very important for, for our colleagues. It's both an energy boost and a means of professional development.
Maybe I'll weigh in here just to give you a sense of what the year looks like. And we're hoping that there'll be as much engagement from professionals and directors as possible. Again, just so in terms of the Minkoff, one thing to understand is that we are looking for funders. We have a grant out to put that back into place. So we just really need funders. Sometimes it needs people, see the JCRCs are located in federations, so they say, well, why do we need to do this professional development,
Melanie, you need to go back.
Okay.
Just say half audio.
No, we're muted. No, we're good. Okay, sorry.
All right, sorry about that. So there are a number of places. We are looking for grant funding to support professional development. We think it's really, really important. So that is, if you know of any foundation that might be interested in supporting that part of our work, please let me know. But what we're hoping to do is we have just, at the board meeting, there was a vote yesterday or Sunday. Is it off? No. Okay. So I'll quickly. Okay. So I'll quickly update you on what that is, which is we're going to have a smaller executive committee of 11 people. We're reducing our board from 100 and something to 37. And then we're going to have a delegates assembly. The delegates assembly's purpose is going to be to have further engagement of JCRC professionals and chairs and board members. And that's yet to be determined in what it will look like. But we want, we put together we put a lot of hard work into our fall and spring meetings. And, whether it's going to be virtual like this or more, we could get more directors and more of you in person together to grapple with these issues. We want to have opportunities for more hands-on engagement. The way that our corridor looks this year in terms of involvement of what we love for you to consider is we had our fall meeting and we're having the virtual retreat. We are having our national conference later. It's going to be in April, from April 21st through the 24th. And we have sent this to every single JCRC. We've sent 25. And what we're asking everyone to do is to put this date on your calendar, hand them out to your board members, and try to come as a delegation to the conference. The national conferences are really amazing experiences of networking, of being educated, hearing high-level speakers you wouldn't otherwise. And our purpose of getting best practices, meeting with others that are dealing with challenges that you are. And this year we're planning to have tracks. So we'll have a track for the chairs, tracks for directors, tracks for board members. So we really hope that we're giving you enough time and and some promotional stuff that you can bring an actual delegation to the conference. We think this year warrants that. The other thing that we do is we have an Israel mission. And the Israel mission is a really incredible experience to go to Israel and grapple with some of the issues that we're dealing with locally. So while you are having to, deal with delegitimization and defend Israel to non-Jewish community, you can come to Israel and grapple yourself, something happening, to grapple yourself with some of these issues and meet firsthand with those.
You made it again. Okay.
So in Israel, you meet with different members of the community so that you can see democracy in action. And we go to Ramallah, we go to the Syrian border to see how Israel's dealing with the Syrian victims, those who are injured. We meet with high-level officials, and we meet with those who are dealing with different issues of gender and racial discrimination, and all these different issues that Israel is grappling with as a young democracy, and that we need to really understand the complexities as we deal with anti-BDS work and other things locally. So we have a very unique trip, and it's a wonderful way both to build cohorts of people as well as to have this experience firsthand yourself. A lot of times people involved in the JCRCs or federations go on missions, but they're either bringing non-Jewish community to Israel, or they're seeing how the federation is making a difference. But this one is to help strengthen your knowledge base as a Jewish communal worker working on issue-based work. And something that we're going to be doing differently this year is, instead of having a spring meeting in New York, which would be a 2-day mini conference, we're instead going to have a fly-in day in Washington, D.C. And this is going to be in June, the days to be determined. And we hope that when we set out the date, we had a date, but it had to be changed at the board meeting, that you'll all be able to participate as well. And so that way, we're starting together with setting the agenda now. We're going to have time in our conference, and then we're going to be able to go on the Hill together. So that's our year, and we hope that you'll participate in it. The other thing I wanted to say, I know Doug is going to talk more about the work at the JCRC level, but I just wanted to go over with you the relationship between IAN, JFNA, Washington office. Should I do this now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And JCPA. JCPA, throughout its history, has created pilot projects on major issues to grapple with major issues of the day. Sometimes these projects become very successful and they grow and become independent, at which point they roll out to be a little bit more independent of JCPA. So we're, in a sense, the incubator. And although they stay part of our family and we stay involved in it, they're no longer administered in our offices. So, for example, one is COJAL, which works on environment. Another one is civility, or resetting the table. And the third one is the Israel Action Network. So for the past 7 years, the Israel Action Network lived in JCPA. It was born here, it grew here. But the IAN has become very successful, and it has now been rolled out to be administered by JFNA. The majority of its funding comes from JFNA. It has a larger staff than we could accommodate here, but we stay very, very involved in it. It's a real project, it's a real partnership, and we liaise with them. And so we know that you at the local level, Stephanie Hausner is part of our program and policy team. I'm part of their IAN team. And so we keep abreast of what's going on, and we know that there's additional work and programming and support that comes from IAN. But I don't want anyone to think that, that there's anything separate. This is a natural way that projects are rolled out of JCPA. And the other one is our work with JFNA Washington office. We have made great efforts in the last year to work in lockstep with their Washington office. JFNA's Washington office, basically, many JCRCs are also the government affair workers at the local level. And therefore, you're doing work both that comes from JFNA, which I consider to be like your bread and butter if you're a department of federation, and issue-based work and intergroup relations from JCPA. And so JFNA is really monitoring Congress and calling action needed for what is really the bread and butter of JFNA. They're looking to make sure that policies and legislation don't harm agencies and don't harm the fundraising capacity and other things that are specific to JFNA. JCPA, on the other hand, is working on issues that reflect our values and community relations, what we need to be involved with in the public sphere, and with implementing them in lockstep with other diverse communities, African American community, Latino legislators, and other influential civic leaders to ensure that the Jewish voice is part of shaping the community at large, but also that we stand with others and they stand with us, and to be a pluralistic society that reflect our values. And that's, we do it together. Again, I'm on the legislative team of JFNA Washington office, which is new, and they are now on our policy advisory committee. We're really happy about the partnership that we're created. And our main purpose is to make the work easier for you. We don't want you to get one direction from one organization, another director from another, and be like, why don't those people, you know, get together at the national level? We're busy down here, you know, at the local level. So I just wanted to make sure there was some clarity. And if you have any questions about our three organizations and its relationship to you or each other, please let me know, because I know that you intersect with each one of us.
So I'm going to continue now, but I also want to encourage folks to please type your questions in, and we've tried to get to everyone we've seen so far, but don't hesitate. I'm now going to take it to the JCRC level. And I just want to reiterate something I said earlier, and that is JCRCs come in all shapes and sizes. And there are JCRCs that have a half-time director. There are some that have multi-staff. There are about 115 that are committees of their federation with relative degrees of autonomy, some with lots of autonomy, some with not so much autonomy. And there are about 10 independent JCRCs, that is to say separate 501c3s, that also still work in close partnership with their federations, but also may get funding from other sources as well. And still, every one of our JCRCs fundamentally has the same mandate, the same mission, the same overall agenda. You know, and that's, I think, what binds us together. And so with that in mind, I wanted to really now focus on two documents that I think can be hopefully helpful in your own community, because I don't know a single JCRC that at some point or another hasn't either had to answer the question, why do we need a strong JCRC in our community, or what is the you know, what is the major thing that JCRC does that somebody else couldn't do, or what is the elevator speech for a JCRC? So I wanted to develop two documents and share two documents that I thought would be helpful, and you should feel free to use them in your own community. By the way, I would say we went through a very interesting exercise in San Francisco. Formally, it's called a tagline. And we wanted to figure, and a tagline should be very short. And we wanted to see if we could develop a tagline that described the work of our JCRC. And this is what we've been using for probably the last 7, 8 years, at the bottom of practically everything. What JCRC stands for: pursuing a just society and a secure Jewish future. Pursuing a just society and a secure Jewish future. So if we're asked, what's our elevator speech? To me, that's our elevator speech, and those two are inextricably linked. The first document, and I think we sent this to you as well, is what are the key functions of a Jewish Community Relations Council and its unique role. And if we can take a look at the document, hopefully it's also showing on the screen. And hopefully you can still hear me.
1 second. I think you made it again. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I have a number of key bullet points, and I'm just going to go through it quickly. But the very first is the overriding one, to educate and advocate. So what are our key functions and what is the JCRC's unique role? To educate and advocate on the issues of vital concern to the organized and demands of Jewish history in the diaspora. So I think critically important to remind folks that we didn't just come up as a result of the understanding in the aftermath of the Holocaust that a consensus body was essential, but that Jewish community relations has always been a core function of JCRC, of the Jewish community. The second, to serve as the representative body that approximates what we call the organized Jewish community and that enables us to both protect and define the broad tent. Increasingly there are dramatic pressures within communities to narrow the broad tent. Who's in the tent? Who's out of the tent? I think one of the key functions that a JCRC can play on behalf of the entire community is to help maintain a broad tent. And the image I often talk about is to maintain as broad a tent as possible without it collapsing. It means, in a sense, cutting off the far extremes on the left and the far extremes on the right, but also protecting broad-ranging, critical, diverse views on a full range of issues, and that's a critical function as well. The third speaks to the transparency of our process. Several years ago,
Sorry, hold on again. Okay.
Several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lot of pushback in a number of communities when decisions were made to take a position on the Iran deal. And what's really interesting is so often it had less to do with what that position was, and more often it had to do with who are the people who have the authority to make the decision. Well, the answer is JCRCs have a long-standing tradition of having that credibility within the community to process issues, to think through issues. By the way, whether it's an issue that can be done within a week because there's an urgency to it, or over 6 months because you want to fully study and vet the issue. That, again, is the kind of elasticity that JCRCs have. So to offer that role that JCRCs provide, that can be invaluable not only to the community, but also specifically to federations, which don't often have that kind of ability to process issues to the extent that JCRCs do. To determine when we have credibility to speak and act, and when it's important for Jewish voices to be represented, though not necessarily through the JCRC. There are issues that are very important to members of our community. I like to give the example of capital punishment, where we haven't had a consensus on that issue, whether or not it's an issue that affects the entire Jewish community or it's an issue we should take a position on. But there are Jewish organizations, such as the Union of Reform Judaism, that's member organization that has a very clear stance and that can be called upon so that there is a Jewish voice, even when that voice can't be that of a JCRC. To help to hold the center, or what I like to call nuanced, impactful activism, while balancing the two sides of the issue ledger, the universal and the particularistic. I think in this polarized environment, that's a critically important role we play. To multiply our impact, and I talked about that before. To be the one-stop shop for managing the community relations issues that arise in the Jewish community. I think sometimes JCRCs may not even fully appreciate themselves how much expertise they have amassed in navigating and addressing very sensitive, complex community relations issues. Sometimes there's a Jewish summer camp that faces a sudden community relations crisis. Sometimes it's a day school. Sometimes it's a synagogue. For the JCRC to offer itself as having that expertise to help deal with sensitive community relations issues is another invaluable role that JCRCs can often play and be appreciated for assuming that role within the community. To serve as the exemplar of civil discourse in our community. So many people are concerned about the breakdown of civility in the broader society that inevitably seeps into our own community. What single institution is a better exemplar of civil discourse than the JCRCs, which practice it on a day in and day out basis? To mobilize our community while continuing its balance behind the scenes and in front of the scenes strategies and tactics, that ability to have that elastic toolkit of activist opportunities is something that, again, defines JCRCs. That on a moment's notice, we can determine whether or not the most effective way to address the issue is through a behind-the-scenes approach or kind of rev up the engine, mobilize the entire community, or a scaled approach, or what is required. And again, I think JCRCs time in and time again have that ability, and hope that that can be helpful to communities as well. To map the key influentials and institutions throughout the community and engage in relationship building as the foundation on which our activism is based. There is no question, and everybody who has been in this boat will report the same thing, that when those relationships already are built, then when a crisis emerges, it is multiple times easier to be able to resolve that issue than if relationships aren't built. We had a program yesterday, a workshop that will relate to what we do in our second retreat on tools for navigating in a polarized era. And one of the participants was Bob Kaplan from the New York JCRC yesterday, who talked about when all hell broke loose with the Crown Heights riots in Brooklyn over 25 years ago, I think. 25 years ago, and the kind of work that the JCRC in New York has been doing subsequent to that to do relationship building, and what a difference that has made in the community. To take a constant read of the temperature and the need trends within the community and beyond, and formulate strategies based on them, while serving as the eyes and ears for the community on potentially explosive issues. In other words, we're not just, I think, the most effective strategists and tacticians on the key issues, but also we're identifying trends. What are the trends we see in terms of attitudes on Israel and where that may manifest itself, for example? What are the trends we're seeing in terms of intergroup relations? What are the trends we're seeing in terms of hate groups? What are the trends we're seeing in terms of groups that until now were not politically engaged or politically empowered within our community that we think we should be building relationships with? So, for example, for many years, the African-American Jewish relationship was understandably the primary relationship in terms of Jews and people of color, and that relationship remains incredibly important. In the meantime, in many communities, other emerging communities have become also important, whether it's the Latino community, or it's the LGBT community, or it's the Asian community, or it's the Muslim community, and so on. So to identify what are the trends that JCRCs should be on top of, I think is also very important. To utilize the JCRC skill set developed for advocacy to engage actively in government relations work. Melanie mentioned government relations work and the relationship with the Washington office of Jewish Federations. You know, there is what I would define as classic community relations, which is the public affairs agenda that we've talked about, and government relations, which is the work on behalf of Jewish organizations that receive funding, so that there is government funding in terms of public and private partnerships. Federations, many federations did an analysis a number of years ago and determined that the total number of dollars that comes into their communities from government sources is often more than the federation itself may raise in the course of a year. So huge premium is placed on the importance of maintaining that kind of work. And again, who has the skill set in terms of building the relationships with legislators, in terms of knowing how to effectively advocate, and in terms of growing the recognition of the value of JCRCs to the extent that JCRCs have the bandwidth to take on that work as well. It can be invaluable in terms of the role that JCRC is seen as playing in the community. And ultimately to serve as the voice of the Jewish community to the non-Jewish community while remembering to actively and regularly inform top key Jewish communal leadership of the important work of JCRCs. So for many years, we took so much to heart the importance of our behind-the-scenes work that we forgot to share with key Jewish community leadership all the critically important things that JCRCs are doing. I am a huge advocate for regularly informing key Jewish community leadership, key professionals, the board of directors of the Federation, other Jewish influentials, of the work that is done by JCRCs. It can be a newsletter that is written in such a way that if it ended up on a supermarket counter, nothing bad would happen as a result. But we can't be so effective in our behind-the-scenes work that we forget to share with Jewish leadership, because that could be a recipe for institutional suicide if nobody knows how important the work of JCRCs are. I can't stress how important it is to not only be an effective inside player and an effective outside player to the broader community, but also to be an effective player in terms of educating key Jewish community leadership about these issues. From my vantage point, these are all key functions of JCRCs. Are they all 100% unique? I don't know. We could, go back and look at each one. But as a totality, I think it defines the unique role and positioning that JCRCs play in the community. I also think it defines why it's so, why JCRC should be so highly valued and supported to an even greater degree than it is. If we can be helpful in advancing any of this within your own communities to your advantage, I hope you'll let us know, because that's very much the kind of intent of this document. If you have questions about it, and I'm hopeful that you do, I hope you will email them now, text them so that we can see them. But this is a document that you should feel free to use and alter in any way that you think can be helpful. The other document that we wanted to share today, and I'm delighted to see that one JCRC director has already indicated that she's sharing the document with her first board meeting of the year tomorrow. That's terrific. And, put your own logo on it, do whatever, that can be helpful. The other document, which came out of a strategic planning process in our JCRC, is called Our Core Values. We had a strategic planning consultant. Now we're talking about 15 years ago, and maybe a little bit longer. And he said, have you ever articulated the values that inform your work? And the answer was no. The answer by almost everybody was, we do the work we do because of Jewish values and Jewish history, but we didn't have anything that said what those values were. By the way, as an aside, I recently did a training for the Jewish Federation's new professionals, and I was asked to do something on the Jewish values that inform Federation work. And in order to do that, I went on the website of as many federations as I could and found that almost none articulated the values that inform their work. And yet, people, I think, gravitate to, want to know, what are those Jewish values that we fulfill? And I think it can be done in a way that is authentic. In other words, it's not that we're pulling out a one-line quote from the prophet Isaiah and saying, therefore we oppose war, because, it said, nation shall not lift up swords against nation, therefore we're against war. I think there's an authentic way to do it. And what struck me is when we went through that process as part of strategic planning, I was blown away by how many core Jewish values spoke directly to the raison d'etre of JCRCs. And I want to briefly show those values to you now. Is that on the screen as well?
I'm afraid to put it up.
Pardon me?
I'm afraid to put it up.
So hopefully everyone received that document.
I just resent it.
It's just been resent. And I'm going to briefly articulate what those values are. And I'm going to do it in reverse order, actually. So building consensus and speaking with a collective and civil voice. We have a document that we can send to you. It's a one-pager, actually, of Jewish texts on civil discourse that goes back to the Talmud. You know what, let's send that to everybody on this call. We're not going to go through that right now, but you probably, many of you familiar with, that these and these are the words of the living God, that diversity is a Jewish value, strong argument, in fact, is a Jewish value, and so JCRCs embody that. Democratic and pluralistic vigilance is one of our core values. I'm not sure what source we could derive that from, but nevertheless, that's on our document. Third up from the top is the famous quote from the Pirkei Avot, Imenani li mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not, now when? I think if there's anything that defines what JCRC is about, nothing comes closer. And I know the risk of it sounding like a cliche because we've been to so many speeches where somebody has uttered that quote. But if we step back and really think about the power of what it says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? That's part of why JCRCs and the JCPA came into existence. But if I am only for myself, what am I? Or if I am only for myself, am I really going to achieve our goals? And if not now, when? The urgency that, again, was understood and the inception of the JCRC and JCPA movement being founded. So I think this is something that, has our signature on it. Lo ta'amod aldam re'echa, do not stand idly by. It comes from the book of Leviticus, and by the way, it's defined by Maimonides in his Mishnah Torah to mean that anyone who is in a position to save a life is obligated to do so. Specifically, he stated that one who sees a person drowning or beset by thieves or by a wild animal and can save the person by himself or can get others to save him and does not do so is in violation of this commandment. It's a very powerful concept about not standing idly by. And it really has defined the work of JCPA and the work of JCRC in terms of what it means to have this mechanism that can spring into action instantly. Kol Yisrael, Aravim, Zelazah, all in the house of Israel are responsible for one another. But B'Tselem Elohim, that all are created in God's image. Again, it may sound, like a cliche because it's repeated so often. But so much of the work that we do, whether it's through, the day-to-day work and reaching out to other communities, standing up for the Muslim American community, Jewish coalitions for literacy, other projects that have been initiated over the course of the years by JCPA and JCRCs. So much of it has to do with the fundamental Jewish value that we believe indeed that all human beings are created in the image of God. And then the two others that I think are very interesting as a pair. Tikkun Olam, which is most often the term that's used to define our work, that we care deeply about repairing the world. I have to say that from an objective standpoint, Tikkun Olam comes from a fairly obscure Kabbalistic text about the breaking of vessels and the need to repair the world. It's a perfect term to define what our work is about. I'm not sure how deeply rooted it is in ancient Jewish texts, but it has taken on the depth of understanding of what it means for Jewish communities to look beyond themselves and to care deeply about Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. At the same time, the one that I think, for me, stands out often the most is Mipnei Darchei Shalom, paths of peace. This is one that I find so interesting. Rooted in the Talmud, repeated many different times, Mipnei Darchei Shalom literally means for the sake of peace. And what it says in the Talmud is, for example, we clothe the non-Jews along with Jews. We feed the non-Jewish hungry along with Jews. anyone to bury them with, along with Jews, etc. Mipnei darchei shalom. But what's clear about the understanding of that term that I find so interesting is that it doesn't really just mean for the sake of peace. It really means for the sake of good neighborly relations. The reason we are commanded from the Talmud forward to take care of non-Jews along with Jews is because it fosters good neighborly relations. It builds protection. You know, when that horrible war occurred and Bosnia was under attack in that brutal war, and the Jewish community had the only functioning soup kitchen and pharmacy, and it served the entire community, it was fulfilling the commandment of Mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of good neighborly relations. And what they were doing was, on the one hand, in a spirit of tikkun olam, and on the other hand, in a spirit of protecting the Jewish community. And that's what JCRCs do every day. So it's that combination of those values that I think makes our work so extraordinarily powerful. And again, what I find so dynamic about the work of JCRCs and JCPA is that people come into the room with different passions that they care most about. Some the domestic agenda, some the Israel agenda, but the way it comes together is through the internalization of these values as being at the core of our work. So again, if this document in any form, take off the top part, redo it, if it can be helpful in any way to show the extent to which the work of your JCRC is grounded in central Jewish values, not something that somebody has conjured up, but right at the heart of core Jewish values, I don't think that anybody could find a way to disagree with the fact that JCRCs speak from a fundamental place of Jewish value. And again, it may not be one individual piece of this document, but the totality of it together, from my vantage point, speaks volumes about how powerful our connection is both to Jewish history and to Jewish values. Utilize it in any way that you would like. So I hope that any of the things that we've said has stimulated more questions, but I will stop there, turn it back over.
Wonderful. Just very quickly, I wanted to show two things, and then we want to see if we can open this up to be able to have some sort of dialogue. It's our first time doing this on Zoom webinar, but we want to have a chance for people to raise other issues that they'd like input from each other. But I want to say very quickly two things. One is we're launching this today. It's In Your Backyard, a Criminal Justice Toolkit. And it's very specifically for you. It's how to advocate, educate, advocate, and mobilize. We put a lot of our heart and soul into it, and we hope that you will use it, or you can order more copies. We're going to send it to you online to download. And the other is we hope that you are receiving and opening our JCPA update. We're sending it every other week, and in it are action items, education items. We'd love to put anything that you want to have in there to share what's happening in your local community. But this is our communications tool, and as a network, we think it's really important. We've sent everybody bookmarks. So that's kind of our advertising for it, and we can send them to you if you want to give them out at your board. And we also have this brochure and our policy guidelines. So that's my advertising. And our next two sessions, the next ones are going to be more, we gave you a lot of information today, and we know we really wanted you to have some grounding, fundamental information about JCPA and JCRC relationship. The next one is going to be on really how to deal with a polarized environment, and there'll be a lot more time for interaction. And the third one on October 10th is going to be on policy, so that we'll have much more time as well to grapple with your policy issues. Today was just more of an overview about how we work, how policy is made, etc. So we'd like to be able to open it up.
We ask if you're interested in saying something to please unmute yourself and to let us know your name in the chat window.
Kristen, what date is the next one?
Okay, sorry. The next session is going to be on September 26th.
Oh, I did.
Oh,
Oh, I don't even remember that. Oh, I didn't even remember the past.
Please note you're all unmuted at the moment, so if you are not interested in sharing something, you should mute yourself. The next session is October 26th, and the session after that is October 10th. It's going to be 12 o'clock Eastern time.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have a lot of.
Okay, does anyone,
One more time the date.
okay, the dates are September 26th and October 10th, and we're going to send you follow-up emails as well.
And at the same time.
And at this, yes,
And there's a lot.
12 to standard time. Does anyone have any things that are happening locally, any other questions, anything they would like to hear other directors weigh in on? I mean, chairs, sorry, weigh in on. The other thing we're going to do from this call is set up a listserv so that you can all speak with each other without going through us. You could pose a question about something that you're dealing with and put it in the listserv and, you know, see who responds.
We will definitely be sending out a packet in advance of the next call, and I just would urge everyone to take a look at the packet prior to it, because it'll be very helpful in terms of going through the material.
Yes, we will aim to get you the materials for each call about 5 days before the call.
And other issues that you would very much, over the course of even these next two calls, for us to weave in, things that are dominant in terms of your experience as CRC chairs that you think would be most helpful, and presumably relevant to others beyond one community. And you can unmute yourself if you would like, or you can type in the message.
We will be emailing materials out to the addresses of the people who've registered. If you're interested in being included or have not received anything, I'm putting my email, this is Haya, in the chat. Please let me know, and I will include you in the list as well.
Right, we're not planning to put any materials in the mail. Unless you specifically request it, we will be sending it only by email.
Great. Other questions?
Well, we're really excited. We had almost 40 communities represented on this call.
Okay, I have an additional question.
Okay, I'd be interested in
best practices to avoid stepping on the toes of other organizations, such as AJC, that also view themselves as engaging in broad-based community advocacy.
Great. Okay, so that's something I think that we could definitely, we'll make a note of, and we'll weave into one of the next two calls. Everybody can see that? Haya?
No.
Oh,
okay, so I'm going to read this question. I would be interested in best practices to avoid stepping on toes of other organizations such as AJC that also view themselves as engaging in broad-based community advocacy. One of the things that JCPA suggests to JCRCs is if you have a AJC in your community, that you invite the AJC professional and a lay leader to be part of your CRC. We think if you model how the JCRC board works, which is we have representatives, JCPA, we have representatives from all the national agencies that are part of JCPA on our board, and many of the JCRCs locally model this. And it's a really good way to both work together, because you're working in the same community, to leverage resources, expertise. A lot of times AJC has really and ADL have they're great speakers, they have great experts, they have great materials that will help you do your work. So to kind of regard them both as strategic in creating your strategy, as well as using them as a resource and having them at your table, I think, you know, makes relationships much stronger. And I wouldn't worry that you're all, from fundraising organization. When it comes to the JCRC work, it really doesn't matter.
So we can get into this in more detail, I think, at a subsequent one, because obviously turf issues do arise in many communities, even with the best.
Doug, you're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, we'll get into this question in more detail, because turf issues inevitably arise in many communities, even with the best of intentions and stress, or the balance of staying on a topic in depth for the year versus dealing with things that come up. I mean, there's another way of also framing that, which is you walk into work expecting to focus on X, and all hell breaks loose, and you have to sort of set all that aside. So how do you move from being in a kind of a constantly responsive mode into a proactive mode? So we can look at both of that. Staying on topic, and that is, will these be captured in notes?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. And then also processes of CRCs for how they identify which issues require action, and this is something that we'll sort of both talk on the chair side and the ED side, but sort of what the decision-making, how the decision-making powers work, basically, in terms of chairs, in terms of executive committees, in terms of boards, in terms of directors and the like. And so I think that's a very useful topic for us to get into as well. Any other topics that folks would like us to take on for the future?
Are these for the future?
I think it's for the future.
And they can continue to email them to me.
Right.
We're going to be muted again for a second. You can certainly continue to email them to me throughout the next 2 weeks, and we will make sure to share them with Doug and Melanie so that they can be incorporated.
One thing I do want to say about the balancing topic, though, is it's really important not, especially with programming, and because we need to be flexible, you need to have enough energy available to deal with issues that come up, because we do know in the JCRC world it's a regular occurrence. So it's something to think through when you're thinking about what in-depth issues you want to grapple with in your community, how much lay responsibility can be put into more of the programming work or the educational work on an issue you want to do, or to represent you in the outside community, so you can be flexible.
Right, and next time, Shelley, who is herself a JCRC chair who wasn't available for the first one, will be joining us, and who will obviously be bringing that perspective into the conversation as well, which is very important.
We're going to be muted again for a second.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
So I'll make a closing comment, and I know Melanie will. I don't know if Cheryl's still on, and if she wants to. Oh, okay. So I just want to say, I want to thank everybody for participating today. I want to reiterate, having been in the role of a JCRC director, the incredible respect I have for my colleagues who are on the front lines on a daily basis, and the incredibly warm respect I have as well for the CRC chairs who champion the work of JCRCs, who are often and always, almost always, I should say, a source of tremendous support for the JCRC directors, and who bring you bring your own wisdom and your leadership and your passion to the table, and it's just so valuable, and your time is also duly noted, because I know I've seen the difference between when somebody has moved from vice chair to chair, what it means in terms of the volume of email, the troubleshooting that has to go on, the delicate discussions that go on about very sensitive issues, and the amount of time that you devote day in and day out to this sacred task is so greatly appreciated. So I want to thank you. I also want to thank you for sticking with. I think we got through the most difficult part early on, of the technological challenges in New York, and hopefully we won't have any in the future, but almost everybody stayed on to the very end, so we're grateful for that as well.
And I want to also just thank you so much for participating in this. I hope it's the beginning of a really strong relationship amongst all of us, and that this effort will help us to go from strength to strength. I think everybody feels at this time we need each other, and we're here for you, and please let us know how we can be helpful, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, and this concludes our conference. So thank you all, and a Shana Tova, healthy and sweet New Year.